Good evening, everybody. My name is Bert Dicht. I am Vice President of Membership for the National Space Society. And on behalf of Larry Ahern, Vice President of Chapters, I'd like to welcome you to our Space Forum tonight. And this is a kind of a continuation or complement to what we did last week. Tonight, we're going to have the NSS-MMAARS Space Health and Diet Contest winners. And the topic is a food and nutrition plan for a space flight to Mars. But we have a lot more there as well. So you think you're going to have a very interesting evening ahead. So what I do again is just welcome you. This is our third Space Forum in a row, and I'll be talking about what's coming up next in just a minute. So I do like to set the agenda. So I'd like to start off with some virtual etiquette, a very quick NSS announcement, what's coming up, and we'll get right into the program. It's a pretty complete program today, and then we'll close. As always, I would encourage you, if you have a question, please submit them using the Q&A function, and that is only seen by the panelists. It's a little easier to keep track of using that. And you can use the chat function to make comments, that type of thing. But I encourage everyone to be respectful of the panelists and the audience because everybody can see that. And also, I would encourage you to view the session in speaker mode, so that way you can it highlights whoever is speaking at the time. So let's go right into our announcement. I always ask for those of you who are enjoying this programming and like the Space Forums, to consider making a donation to support NSS. I will put the link into the chat, but giving to our cause helps us continue to give and offer programming just like this. And we do thank everybody who's a member and everybody who has supported NSS through their donations. It keeps us vibrant and strong and helping us make a difference in the space community. Finally, too, at the end of this session, I ask you to please complete the post Space Forum survey. It only takes a few minutes to complete it. And once you exit, it'll take you right there. The survey is anonymous. Your feedback is critically important in helping us plan future events just like this. What's coming up? We do have a session planned for December 2nd, kind of a space year in review. We're still working on that. We've got big plans for 2022. We're not going to be doing any more Space Forums this month. We've got a couple of internal NSS activities that have to happen. And then we've got the Thanksgiving holidays here in the United States. So we'll start again on December 2nd. We might have another one in December, or though we might hold off until the new year and start the new year fresh. So just keep looking for our announcements. And as always, you can go right into, you can go to space.nss.org and actually get a link to all the recordings of previous NSS Space Forums. And they're also available, of course, on our YouTube channel. So now let's get into our program. We've got a really great lineup ahead of our contest winners and also a special guest speaker from NASA Ames Research Center. And I'm going to let the others introduce them, but it's a really interesting topic area about food in space. And I made a comment last week during our space farming session about it's interesting seeing these new perspectives besides technology. So I think you're really going to enjoy this. So this is the agenda for tonight. We've got a lot to cover. And what I want to do right now is introduce Lynn Zielinski, who is our NSS Vice President and Director of Education. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn the program over to Lynn. Okay, Lynn, it is all yours.
Aloha, everybody. There we go.
There you go. We can see it now. Yes.
Yes, we can. Okay, excellent. So Vice President of Education and Outreach at the National Space Society, and I also am a director. I sit on the board of directors. Many, many hats that I wear, but tonight I'm really honored to introduce some of the folks and the programs that we have here at NSS, especially the 2021 winners of the Health and Nutrition Plan for Space, Long Duration Space Flight. And what we're going to be doing is featuring our two winners tonight. But I'd also like to share with you just a little bit about what we do here at NSS in terms of education. And presenting competitions like this one is one of the many things that we do. The Space Edge Academy is really where most of our work and programs occur, at least on the education side. And you can find Space Edge Academy at Space Edge Academy at Space Edge, ooh, I spelled that wrong, sorry. SpaceEdge.academy. Here is what the web page basically looks like. You'll notice up here in the top, we've got some areas where we talk about lessons for teachers that are free and for students. We also have the Centers for Excellence, which is a place where the university level students can find information on very specific topics like additive manufacturing, nanotechnology, and space solar power, and some of the other topics that we have that are cutting edge. We also do workshops and forums as well. We travel around the country, so you can also ask us to come and do workshops for you on space and space education type things. So here we go. That's the right way of spelling it, SpaceEdge.academy. This is how you go to get it. And we also want to announce that this year's food and nutrition plan for long duration spaceflight to Mars is also been started. So we're accepting applications right now. So if you would like to register, and you'll be getting information, the reason for registering is so that we can be in contact with you and give you updates on what's happening with the contest, when the due dates are, if anything changes. So we do encourage you to please register now for the contest. And you can also find on SpaceEdge.academy the past winning papers and their presentations. So we have a Space Edge Academy YouTube channel that's found at the Academy as well. So you can find all the winners there, as well as on the NSS YouTube channel. The other things that we would love to have are more volunteers, especially for this contest and other contests that we have. And the way to contact us is through either spaceedge.academy@gmail.com or through Bill Gardner's NSS address. Bill Gardner is the head of the committee, which you will find out soon, who runs the Health and Nutrition Committee, as well as the founder of this contest. And so now I'd like to, without further ado, introduce Loretta Hall, who is the NSS Space Ambassador. She has lots of experience. She is an author and a freelance writer. She has done many, many things in terms of promoting space and space health, as well as women in space. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And Loretta, it is all yours.
Thank you, Lynn. And as soon as
Oh, did it not do it?
I'm starting to share my screen right now. So here we go. Thank you very much, Lynn. And here we go. We're very excited this evening to showcase the wonderful work of Zsuzsanna Benyo and Katarina Hayden, this year's Space Health Contest winners. This is the contest's third year. The contest had its beginnings in 2018 at the International Space Development Conference in Los Angeles. And during Carolina Chwalick's presentation on repair mechanisms in the human body, she discussed the keto diet's significant outcomes in repair mechanisms and brought contest possibilities to be considered. Bill Gardner of the NSS Space Health and Medicine Committee guided the program contest design in the next months, and through a conversation with Dr. Susan Jewell of Mars Academy USA, a collaboration was born. In the fall of 2019, the NSS Executive Committee supported the pilot program for the contest, which has resulted in the presentations that we'll see this evening. The long duration spaceflight diet contest asks entrants to consider issues affecting both astronauts in space and people here on Earth. All the elements of advanced aging, bone demineralization, ocular issues, changes in the microbiome, and epigenetics are seen in both groups. The purpose of the contest is to develop ways of stimulating by epigenetic means the natural physiological capacity of humans to resist and recover from the well-known health barriers to space flight, including ionizing radiation. The contest encourages participation from students and/or citizen scientists 18 years of age or over. Entrants write a short white paper describing a food and nutrition plan for spaceflight to Mars. This year, they were asked to submit a food and intermittent fasting plan to address insulin resistance. And that's one of the factors identified by NASA, and which is estimated to affect up to 88% of the population in countries dominated by high carbohydrate, low fat eating patterns. Dr. Susan Jewell and MMAARS have offered significant support to the 2021 contest. Their mission includes next generation astronaut training, development of innovations in support of human space exploration, and creation of analog astronaut training missions. Contest prizes, again this year, are cash awards for the second and first place winners, along with opportunities for participation in an MMAARS analog experience, membership in NSS, and possible publication in Ad Astra magazine. The 2022 edition of the contest, as Lynn said, is now open, and full details can be found at the Space Edge Academy website under the contest menu. And entrants can find full instructions and extensive help to prepare their entries. I do need to add a little disclaimer at this point. You can go ahead and read the full disclaimer, but in short, tonight's presentations represent the work of the presenters, not NSS. NSS welcomes the opportunity to encourage thoughtful presentations on spaceflight and space settlement. And now I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Jerry Mclaughlin, a senior grant reviewer at the National Institutes of Health and the National Institute of Drug Abuse in Maryland. He is a significant donor to NSS and this contest. He sits on the NSS Space Health and Medicine Committee, and he has been a guiding force on the committee since early 2020, along with Sandra Worthington, a longtime educator and Pentagon employee. So Jerry, please introduce us to our next speaker.
Thank you. I organized another session on sort of space health a year or two ago, and Dr. Lustig was a remarkable speaker. When we learned that he was going to attend tonight, I said, well, this is the level of person that should introduce the next speaker, who is also a remarkable person. Dr. Lustig is one of those MIT undergrads, Cornell School of Medicine, MD, board certified in endocrinology, now emeritus at UCSF, and that, along with a few other positions there. He's written 3 interesting books about the essential theme of food, Fat Chance in 2012, The Hacking of the American Mind in 2017, and this year, a challenging title, Lure and Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine. He sits on several as Chief Scientific Officer and Advisory Board and Chief Medical Officer for about 4 companies. So Dr. Lustig, please take it away.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I so appreciate that. I need to, have a disclaimer right off the bat here. I am not a space guy. When I was a kid, I told everybody I was going to be a rocket scientist. And then I was an astronomer, student at the Hayden Planetarium when I was 10, 11 years old. But, that's kind of, when I fell off the space patrol. So the fact that I'm invited to give a talk about, or I shouldn't say talk, but to introduce the next speaker and to sort of frame the issue is really a high honor for me, and I so appreciate it. So I'm going to just take the screen for a moment, if you don't mind, and I'm going to show you real quick the paper that got all of this going today. And it is from Cell, and its title is Comprehensive Multi-Omics Analysis Reveals Mitochondrial Stress as a Central Biological Hub for Spaceflight Impact. Written by a group of authors, and the senior author who's going to follow me is Dr. Afshin Beheshti. And Dr. Beheshti has a long and storied career, starting at Tufts, moving to NASA, and has been integrally involved in trying to understand the impact of spaceflight on the metabolic health of astronauts, looking both at blood and urine samples of people who have completed tours in space from 2006 to 2019, and also, most importantly, the twin study done with astronauts Scott and Mark Kelly, looking at each of them as their own control, since they have the same genetic complement. So what Dr. Beheshti has found is that mitochondria are particularly susceptible to the ravages of space. And this is really, really concerning for any long-term space flight. Now, there are probably many reasons why mitochondria are impacted, including radiation, including weightlessness, including cytokines that are released from bone because of lack of gravity, and many, many other things. But without question, one of the biggest issues, and I guess the reason why I was asked to participate here, is food. All right, what do you eat up in space? And the answer is, well, you used to eat, drink Tang, and used to eat these things that, were in pouches. Things have progressed minimally since that time. But in fact, this continues to be a major problem. And we know that processed food causes mitochondrial dysfunction on its own. So it's certainly not making the ravages of space any better. And you can imagine that if you're, going to Mars, which is going to take a year each way, this is going to wreak havoc on the astronauts' metabolic status, and ultimately become an occupational hazard, which we have to deal with. An example of this is shown in this slide here, having to do with mitochondrial dysfunction in response to a simple carbohydrate called sugar. Now, you'll notice glucose over here in green actually activates mitochondrial beta oxidation. And the whole goal of mitochondria is to make ATP. All right, that's what it does. It makes chemical energy so that cells have the power to be able to do what they do. And they do it within the mitochondria through a process called beta oxidation. Glucose activates that by increasing this enzyme here called hydroxyacyl-CoA dehydrogenase. Well, that's good, but the other component of sugar, fructose, actually inhibits mitochondrial beta oxidation by inhibiting 3 separate enzymes, by inhibiting AMP kinase by inhibiting this enzyme here called ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, and finally by inhibiting this enzyme here called carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1A, which is the shuttle that gets fatty acids into the mitochondria for oxidation. So even Ron Kahn, the CEO of Joslin Diabetes Center, who's the senior author on this paper, said the most important takeaway of this study is that high fructose, meaning sugar, in the diet is bad. It's not bad because it's more calories, but because it has effects on liver metabolism to make it worse at burning fat because your mitochondria are being poisoned. As a result, adding fructose to the diet makes the liver store more fat, and this is bad for the liver and bad for whole body metabolism. Well, when your mitochondria are not working right, that means you are going to be insulin resistant. Now, obviously, we know that obesity is associated with insulin resistance through this hyperbolic relationship. You can see BMI here on the x-axis, and you can see insulin sensitivity here on the y-axis. Well, although you'll notice that for any given BMI, there are some patients who are insulin sensitive and some patients who are insulin resistant. And the reason for that is because it's not the fat in your subcutaneous adipose tissue, it's the fat in your liver. And the fat in your liver came from, guess what? Your food, the sugar. Here you can see that insulin sensitivity results in lower incidences of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, irrespective of BMI, compared to insulin resistance, which is much worse than insulin for these diseases than is for diabetes and cardiovascular disease than those who are insulin sensitive. And you can see this Kaplan-Meier curve. We're looking at survival. You'll notice that obesity versus normal weight, it's not the issue. The issue is insulin sensitivity versus insulin resistance. So fixing the mitochondria in order to stay insulin sensitive is going to be a major goal of dietary therapy during spaceflight, and the reason for this competition today. So I'm going to let now Dr. Beheshti tell us what has transpired in this field of mitochondrial dynamics due to spaceflight, and how he thinks food can ultimately either help or hinder us. Dr. Beheshti.
So thank you for the kind introduction, and thanks for having me here. Let me try to grab the screen here.
Stop share.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. No, thanks for that nice setup for the mitochondrial background. So that was good. I could start right away into the talk. So okay, so as Robert said, I'm going to be talking about that paper that came out last year, and then a little more expanded what's happening and how mitochondrial is impacted by space, and then also talk about as the whole topic of this thing, how potential countermeasures, we call them countermeasures in NASA, right, to potentially prevent this mitochondrial damage to happen in space. So before I go on, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the space environment. So I'm going to quickly go through these slides. We also had this review we put out last year in Cell where we discussed the fundamental hallmark. Well, we're going to call it the hallmarks of space biology, but then we changed the fundamental biology features of space flight. You might know about the hallmarks of aging. So in general, the context of things, all the experiments that we have samples and access to is done at low Earth orbit. So what that is, there's two main things we're focusing on here: microgravity as a health risk and space radiation as a health risk. And we know space radiation is a big galactic cosmic rays that come down, bombard people from the heavy ions, from big iron particles to protons that are in space. And then you got solar particle events here. I'm sure solar flares, high energy protons that you get exposed to when you're in space. But when you're at low Earth orbit in the space shuttle or International Space Station, is that in the majority of the research that's being done, you're protected by the magnetic sphere, the Van Allen belt. So that would reduce the dose that you'll get. Now, when you go to Mars, or when you go to Artemis, going to the moon in the next couple of years, you're going to be exposed to the big deep space radiation. And this is sort of an idea. Let me hide this thing here. So this is sort of the idea, kind of the relative dose you get for a mission to Mars compared to what you're used to, let's say on Earth, to people on the ISS. This is an older slide, so Skylab is actually ISS. But I like how it shows here that, you know, going to Mars and back, you get a pretty high dose of a cumulative dose of radiation over time. And then this is going to contribute on top of the microgravity to all these known health risks. So the known health risks we know already, you know, there are both sex independent and sex dependent health risks that occur in females and males. And again, this review put out, you know, we kind of nicely said, all right, you know, low Earth orbit risks compared to deep space journey, you can see that, you know, every part of your body is going to get impacted. And the longer you're in space, of course, and the longer the mission, the more radiation damage you'll get, the more microgravity compounding effects you'll get. And of course, as you see here, you know, whether it's like renal issues or a thing called space-associated neuroocular disease syndrome, I should say SANS, where the eye actually gets impacted and it could cause to reduced vision. And all these things increase. So that, you know, before I go on the types of experiments that we use now, you know, maybe not everyone's familiar with, but maybe a lot of you are, but just briefly, you know, types of experiments that we do is that we can actually assess now the health risks and come up with ideas, you know, that happen. One is, you know, sending samples to space. So this is actually a video of mice that are on the International Space Station, or mighty mousestronauts, as I call them. You know, you send samples like that, and it's not just mice, but people send up plants, worms, fruit flies, anything. So, you know, that goes up as long as you have the grant and the you know, good idea to do experiments, it goes up there. So that's one way to do experiments, actually send samples to space. The other ones are ground simulated experiments, which, you know, I've done and many others have done. And a lot of the ground space radiation simulations you do at a place called Brookhaven National Lab, which is a high energy physics collider, a facility in Long Island, New York. And NASA had set up a NASA Space Radiation Laboratory where, you know, they basically took they took a line from the beam, this high energy physics colliders, and they could actually then irradiate samples here with heavy ions that are in space to simulate that, like iron particles. So that's one way. And then the microgravity setup, there's many different ways you could do it in cell culture, but one way in mice and rats are these kind of high limb setup where you suspend a mouse by a tail and then the weight in the back legs basically unloaded for those few weeks that are the mice are like that. So simulate the weight loss you'll get. And there's other models that other collaborators I have at Beth Israel also have these rat partial weight brain models. So that's those type of experiments are done. Now, if you don't have any experiments and you don't have ways to actually get access to running experiments, one way you could go actually get data yourself and play around is NASA has set up this NASA Gene Lab program, or platform, I should say, where I'm part of, help develop. And this is where a lot of the data for this paper has come up. I'm going to go over really quickly. And the NASA Gene Lab platform is an open science, basically, idea, and where all the omics, all the big data, all the bioinformatics ends up, and it's open to the public. Everything is free. And basically, this is what it is. You know, you go to genelab.nasa.gov, and you could, if you have an idea, let's say if you're a good hardcore computer scientist, you could actually download all the raw data, analyze it yourself. But there's different tiers of data made available here, from the raw data to process data. Like if you're, you know, just a person who wants to knows how to play around with the data but doesn't want to process stuff, and then even for the citizen scientists, as was discussed earlier, and the people who are not computation inclined. The data has been processed. There's visualization portals here where you actually can go type your favorite gene, for example, like your mitochondrial gene, and see if that's changed with different data sets that are here available for different conditions. So it's a good tool and a good platform that anyone can access and come up with your own hypothesis to look at. So let's go to the data. So how this, you know, Gene Lab is basically instrumental here with all the publicly available data to come up with this story. So as Robert had pointed out, this paper came out in Cell last year, and it was a massive undertaking. And one thing I want to point out is also that this is part of a larger package of Cell Press where me and Chris Mason and Susan Bailey, along with Cell Press, we put together a whole package of papers called Biology of Spaceflight from myself, from others, and many other in the space biology community. And if you go to this website here, there's 29 papers, about 30 papers here, covering many aspects of space biology research. So this is just one of the many papers there. And of course, you know, this is not just one person's work. This is many people that came together, worked together. And I like to point out that in Gene Lab, we have these things called analysis working groups, where this is all basically the scientific community has come together. They join them. It's kind of a grassroots kind of thing. And everyone here basically works on a common goal to work on space biology questions. And anyone's open to join these analysis working groups. We have 4 of them at Gene Lab. One of them I lead is the multi-omics systems biology group. Another is the animal group. One is focused on microbes and another is focused on plants. So if you're interested, you can contact me or others. If you go to the Gene Lab site, and then anyone can join and work on together with many folks like here on really nice, exciting projects that are related to space biology. So it's a nice way for let's say NASA folks or people who have funding to do space biology can actually come together and work on some, novel and nice ideas. So just briefly, we're going to go over the paper. I'll just give you kind of the high overview, general view of what's happening and how we came up with this. So the idea that when these folks came all together was, I asked the question to say, is there some sort of master switch in space that is turned on systemically in the body because your body's in space, and there should be a systemic impact from radiation because your whole body is being radiated and microgravity affecting your whole body. So then we said, all right, let's everyone go take some data sets. So there's a bunch of mouse data sets from mice that have flown to space. And when they come down, they sacrifice the mice and they harvest the organs. So you got all these organ data from different strains of mice that were flown to space. So that's a bunch of data sets that people start looking at. Another was in vitro experiments where cells in a dish go up to space. Experiments are done. So then you can see like these different cell lines and what happens in like specific cell environments. So then people run these omics from transcriptomics, RNA sequencing, to DNA genomics, so epigenomics, to look at methylation of DNA, and then even proteomics, so you look at the protein level, and then metabolites, so you look at the metabolomics. So from the group here, everyone took a piece of that. And when we all came back together, saying, okay, so I want to analyze all these things, the thing kept showing up over and over again, no matter which organ you looked at, no matter what kind of cell type you looked at, was mitochondrial dysfunction was top of the charts, for pathway dysfunction in genes. And so that was really interesting. That started showing up, like, for example, when I'll show you in a second, where, in organs, like, for example, the eye, you won't expect certain pathways that were there to show up that was completely similar to things that were in the liver. But then when you look deeper, all these pathways were all related to mitochondrial dysfunction. So there's a systemic impact in mitochondrial happening, not only like in the liver, for example, in the metabolic organs, but also in places that you won't expect that, are happening. And then to get confirmation if this is actually translate to humans, because everything's in mice or cell culture here. That's when we had data from our collaborators in part of the project, Chris Mason, who's the main PI for the twin study data with Scott Kelly and Mark Kelly. So he had a bunch of omics data that he allowed, we worked with each other to actually contribute to this work. And then we also had the largest amount of physiological data. So from urine and blood, that was from these folks at Johnson Space Center, Scott Smith, Brian Crucian, and Sarah's work. So then that really made this paper a comprehensive view of what's happening systemically. So just briefly, just a high level overview of these figures. It's complex, there's a lot here, but the main take-home message of this figure was, this is from the mouse data. So this here is from the cell data here in panel A. And everything that the most common pathways that were over and over again coming up was mitochondrial dysfunction, no matter what kind of cell cultures, independent experiments done from samples flown to space. What was interesting then, when you actually found out the central pathways doing all this pathway analysis, so all these figures here are looking at the different organs in the mice, and we saw continuously over and over again, the major hubs of mitochondrial activity and dysfunction happening. Now, what's interesting is some organs, the mitochondrial activity was being up-regulated, while certain other organs were down. I'm going to come into that in a second, and a couple of slides down. So for example, you see that this is the liver here is having the most mitochondrial activity being dysregulated, which makes sense because the liver is a metabolic organ, right? So then, and in the muscle organs, what was interesting is that the soleus muscle, which is here, and the extensor digitorum longus muscle, which is here, the EDO muscle, they had the most mitochondrial dysfunction and suppression happening. And if you know about spaceflight, the soleus muscle is the muscle that's being impacted first by microgravity. So in the mice, it's the same thing, and in humans, it's the same thing. So when that degenerates the quickest, so you would expect things like, mitochondrial suppression happening because the muscle's generating. Now, when you actually went further to look at metabolomics here, and this is a mice metabolomics, mitochondrial activity is happening. So in the metabolites, mitochondrial activity, which is these blue things, is constant happening. This is other mitochondrial specific genes in the different organs. Again, I'm going to go really quick through this, but the take-home message for that part was, things like oxidative phosphorylation, in different organs were being universally impacted. This panel here is looking at all mitochondrial genes mapped from Scott and Mark Kelly's data. So you can see here, this is different cell types here on the bottom. And this is like the conditions from pre-flight versus ground, meaning Scott Kelly's cells versus Mark Kelly's, because they're identical twins, you know, what's happening. And then this is going from in-flight, post-flight, and this is comparing Scott Kelly before and after flight, during in-flight, and then before, after flight, and then, you know, before flight. And the take-home message from this is that indeed, like what happens to Scott Kelly, from the time before flight, and then from the time he's in flight coming back, the mitochondrial activity shifts in the cells, as you see the pattern here. So there's mitochondrial activity that was stable before he went, but as he goes in flight, it kind of shifts from, you know, either these cell types to suppressing a certain cell types and being activated in other cell types. When you go further, oops, wrong way. When you go further, looking at specific like mitochondrial factors, again, you know, there's a big picture. You see, this is Scott Kelly, this is Mark Kelly. And of course, the Mark Kelly on the ground, it's pretty stable over time. You don't think, you know, over a year, if you're a healthy person, your mitochondrial activity should be pretty stable, and the bioenergetics in your body shouldn't change too much. But in Scott Kelly, you can see during flight, these mitochondrial DNA subunits are pretty much being activated as he goes over time, which is concerning. You don't want that to happen. And then what's interesting, this is not astronaut physiological data. This is the big pool of 59 astronauts over the last 3 decades that our collaborators in Johnson Space Center, Scott Smith, Brian Saraswart, and Brian Crucian put together for us to include in this paper. And what we did was find markers from the urine and blood that relate to mitochondrial activity. So, for example, antioxidants, or oxidative phosphorylation related factors, physiological factors in the blood were suppressed. In the urine, these 2 factors that are related to oxidative stress are increased. So that, again, these are all downstream mitochondrial impact that happens that when you have dysfunction or suppression happening is occurring. And then what's interesting is down here, this metabolic flux analysis. The big take-home message from here is there's the liver data, this is muscle. You can see a lot of mitochondrial suppression happening. This is for ground control mice. This is the mice that were in flight. Again, mice that are in ground, mice are in flight. You see in the liver, these mice actually are trying to ramp up mitochondrial production and bioenergetics. In the muscle, it's reverse. And what, you know, the literature has shown from like standard like muscle dystrophy kind of literature and things like that is that basically, you know, the liver is trying to overcompensate for that muscle degeneration is happening. So this is exactly what's happening in the mice here that were flown to space. This is just looking at another way of it, looking at downstream for like lipid and fatty acid dysregulation that occurs. You know, again, cholesterol's heavily, significantly increased in the astronauts, this is from the astronaut data. And then again, you see that, you know, for fatty acid and lipids, it's again, the muscle is degenerating and it's heavily increased in activity, trying to, you know, for the mitochondrial metabolism in the muscle that's degenerating, while in the liver, now it's reversed again. So these are all go well with what's happening at the mitochondrial activity. And again, how is this later? Again, if you don't familiar with lipid and mitochondrial function, there's that plenty of nice reviews out there showing how mitochondrial function is and lipid homeostasis are, you know, interplay with each other. And it really stems from mitochondrial, you know, reactive oxygen species that creates things like inflammation and things like lipid cytotoxicity. So, you know, this is a really quick overview of this because I'm trying to make sure I'm respectful of the time. But, you know, how this would play into like now some, you know, current projects we're going, and then how this might relate with like, you know, how potential countermeasures of nutrition you might want to give. So one quick, really big overview project that we're going to do that's following up is not, you know, this is only looking at mammals, right? How humans are being impacted, the previous project, and how mice are. But with these folks now, we're starting a collaboration on looking across all species. And what we've been starting to find, you know, just a big picture overview is that not only do mitochondrial dysfunction and suppression and you know, activity happen in mice and humans, it happens in plants, it happens in worms, it happens in fruit flies. Microbes, of course, don't have mitochondrial, but there's there's the consequence of the mitochondrial dysfunction that affects your microbes and your gut profile too, microbiota. So this would affect your, you know, nutritional output also, and then, you know, it's a circular loop. Then affect your mitochondrial dysfunction. So this is what we're finding. This is hopefully we'll have this project done within hopefully in a few months to try to publish. But the idea is mitochondrial dysfunction is not just for, in humans and mice. It could be in plants, and that could be concerning too, because, we want to try to grow plants, have it self-sustainable. And plants rely on mitochondria and bioenergetics just as much as any other organism does. So then, we know this is an issue, and we know this is a problem. So how can we mitigate this? So there's a couple of ways to do it. There's a couple of other papers we put up part of this package that are related to things called microRNAs that I put up. So microRNAs, I'm going to really quickly go to this, really small RNA that are 22 nucleotides, and they're involved in many things, and they're found in all organisms, and they're basically float in your body in any kind of fluid you have. So that's a quick overview of it. But what we've done is in this paper is found a microRNA signature that's floating in people's bodies that are related to spaceflight signature. And long story short is that, we, again, just had twin study data in here and looked at other mouse, many different mouse kind of setups for simulated space experiments to mice flown in space and rats and so on. And we found this microRNA signature could be easily a biomarker for health risk. And this microRNA signature has a heavily involved mitochondrial functions. So everything's all a closed loop, how things are happening. Now, can we use these microRNAs that are floating in your body that are up during space that are impacting mitochondria to actually mitigate spaceflight? So I'm just going to go to the climax of this paper, which was looking at way to target these things. And just really quickly, we do experiments on Earth, those ground-based experiments, simulating galactic cosmic rays at Brookhaven National Lab. This is just a beam profile if you're interested. And what we did is use our collaborators, Pete Grabham at Columbia University. He has this 3D microvasculature structure, which is this. It's made out of endothelial cells. It's grown in a dish, basically. It has no blood, but it kind of forms a capsules like this microvascular as it does. And basically, when it radiates, when you radiate them, these vessels collapse, as you see here. But using these things called integumeters, which are inhibitors for these microRNAs, and this is from another collaborator who has a company called Ames Biotech. So you can make these self-delivery integumeters and throw them in the culture, or you can inject them in mice. We said apply them 24 hours before radiation, and then radiate them with this galactic cosmic ray that simulates the space radiation you get. And this is the amount of radiation, this 0.5 gray, that if you go to Mars and back, the total dose. This is a really high dose of space radiation. And indeed, what happened was we completely rescued that space radiation damage when you looked at it 6 days later from the radiation. And this is just another control where, you could use the vehicle, meaning the scrambled version of this integument. So just to make sure the vehicle itself or the delivery system didn't rescue it, so, and you can see that, it doesn't. So this is really amazing. And some of the bioenergetics that are involved is being rescued in these cell culture too. So that, again, it's the mitochondria. This is one way to restore, maybe possibly using, microRNA technology to do that. People know all about the vaccines, doing the mRNA. So microRNAs are not that, but they're, still RNA technology used to try to rescue and for therapeutics, in this case, countermeasures. And the idea is, again, this is one mechanism to do it. And then now for the mitochondrial story, some things that, that is in the works that we're working on to actually prevent the damage being caused in all these different downstream features that we see happening with mitochondrial dysfunction. With several companies that we're working on inhibitors to inhibit muscle generation by promoting bioenergetics. So we're going to be conducting experiments next summer at Brookhaven National Lab with mice to see if we could rescue muscle generation by increasing the mitochondrial activity. And there's nutrients you could take, and this is sort of a nutrient idea where, a supplement where it's non-toxic, and if it works, there's ways you could even boost that up higher. So getting back to the food and nutrient part. And just briefly, I hope we can go over time, but this is, if you're interested, again, this is the cell package that we put together, go on this, and you can read about this paper, but there's many other papers about space biology to get this really comprehensive view of what's occurring with all the research and different things that are happening. So yeah, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to seeing the talks from the people who have won these awards. So thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Dr. Beheshti. Fascinating setup for our next two talks. Get my screen showing again, and oops, here we go. Katarina Hayden, our second place winner this year, is an American entrant, originally from Rhode Island. While she was an undergraduate student at Cornell University, she attended a guest lecture by Dr. Scott Smith, the director of Nutritional Biochemistry Laboratory for NASA. And that sparked a fascination with the intersection of biochemistry and nutrition. Katarina is currently studying molecular nutrition as a PhD candidate at Cornell. Her research is focused on vitamin B12 and folate metabolism. She's interested in micronutrient metabolism, nutrigenomics, and space nutrition. And she aims to discover new ways to prevent and ameliorate disease by altering nutrient intake and minimizing the use of pharmaceuticals. I see that Katarina and I share some personal interests. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with her family, reading, and listening to true crime podcasts. So Katarina, tell us what you have come up with.
Thank you for the introduction, Loretta. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, and present. Yes, so the title of my contest submission was a balanced, plant-rich, and time-restricted diet to minimize health risks from space and improve metabolic health. So space hazards like ionizing radiation and microgravity cause multi-level effects on cell and tissue health throughout the body. We have to keep these health risks in mind as we think about how to design a spaceflight diet to minimize disease risk. Several of the recorded physical effects astronauts have experienced, like insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, and cardiovascular dysfunction, have been associated with metabolic syndrome. And so metabolic syndrome is a cluster of conditions that, when they occur together, can increase risk of many modern diseases, like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. So if we can use nutrition to address these health risks from space and decrease markers of metabolic syndrome, then surely that same diet plan could be used on Earth to support overall health and metabolism. So the contest challenge was to come up with a food, nutrition, and fasting plan for long-duration spaceflight used to improve markers of metabolic syndrome. And we were to take metabolic measurements before and after testing our proposed diet plan to see whether our diet appeared to maintain or restore metabolic health. So when I began researching for this project, I thought it would be ideal to identify the top health concerns to focus on with my diet plan. And the top concerns I identified were muscle and bone loss, insulin resistance, dyslipidemia and liver fat deposition, and finally, dietary adherence. As energy expenditure is either maintained or increased during spaceflight, and evidence from previous missions shows astronauts commonly coming in under their required energy intakes. So I knew that even if the diet I proposed was ideal in its contents to boost health and prevent disease, this wouldn't matter very much if the diet wasn't palatable and if crew members weren't consuming all of it. So my next step in brainstorming was seeing what's been shown before to be successful in improving metabolic health and what were some diets receiving recent attention. So the Mediterranean diet has long been hailed as the golden diet to decrease disease risk. It's relatively balanced in macronutrients, and it includes healthy fats from sources like nuts and fish, and has a lot of plant-based foods and whole grain. On another hand, ketogenic diet has a largely shifted macronutrient distribution, with at least 70% of energy coming from fat. There's some evidence that keto diet can help in the short term with weight loss and improve metabolic measures. However, there aren't too many studies assessing the long-term effects of the diet. And another diet technique, intermittent fasting, has been gaining recognition for metabolic benefits as it forces the body to switch between fuel sources as it goes between prolonged periods of fasting. There are a few types of intermittent fasting, but because we don't want to restrict crew member calorie consumption or cause weight loss, the most suitable type of intermittent fasting is time-restricted feeding. This allows individuals to consume all of their required calories in a specific time window and then fast until that same time window during the following day. So this enables the body to reap some of the benefits of intermittent fasting while also receiving adequate calories to prevent bone and muscle loss. So as a result of my research into health concerns and effects of popular diets, I came to the conclusion that the diet most suited to long-term spaceflight and improving metabolic markers would be a balanced diet with about 20% of energy coming from protein, 45% coming from carbs, and 35% from fat. And as I'll explain more in the next slides, the types and forms of each of these macronutrients was an important consideration. So the proposed diet will be rich in plants and derive a majority of protein from plant sources. Intermittent fasting is also a significant portion of the plan, which included a 10-hour feeding window from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. As I'll also mention later on, this more conservative time window was chosen to increase the likelihood of diet adherence and help crew members adjust easily to the time-restricted feeding routine. As they become more comfortable with this schedule, crew members can decrease the feeding window span to hopefully increase the observed intermittent fasting benefits. So to go through the diet plan by sections, so for protein, even though astronauts engage in high-intensity resistance training, they still tend to lose bone and muscle mass over the course of a mission. So the level of protein was selected as it fits with the daily recommended intake of protein for active individuals. Having a healthy portion of protein will better support muscle synthesis, especially when consumption is spread out throughout the day and when a moderate amount of protein is consumed within 1 to 3 hours after exercise. Also, increasing the amount of protein coming from plant sources rather than animal sources will decrease sulfur and iron levels, which are both associated with increased acid load, bone loss, and oxidative stress. Moving on to carbohydrates. So current contributions from carbohydrates to diets aboard the ISS are around 50 to 55%. And there are no concerns with that level of intake, nor of carbohydrate toxicity at higher levels. But the main concern associated with carbohydrate metabolism is this spaceflight-induced insulin resistance. So main drivers of insulin resistance are obesity and sedentary behavior. Either of these describe your average astronaut. So this led me to look into other drivers of insulin resistance, namely inflammation, lipid metabolism, and the gut microbiome. In digging into the literature, I found that inflammation and gut health are linked, namely through intestinal permeability. So the weaker our intestinal barrier is at preventing unwanted molecules from seeping through, the more inflammation that's going to take place. So by taking steps to improve our intestinal barrier to decrease permeability, we should see decreased inflammation. Examples of some of these steps include increasing dietary fiber, decreasing simple sugar consumption, and incorporating more lower glycemic index foods in the place of high glycemic index foods. Finally, moving on to fat portion. So as I mentioned earlier, I gave the keto diet a lot of consideration option given its recent popularity, but I ultimately opted for a diet containing 35% of calories from fat instead. Most of the keto studies conducted are in the context of weight loss, and because of the increased energy expenditure in flight and the need to meet those energy requirements to support bone and muscle mass, I knew the chosen diet had to be isocaloric and maintain body weight. And there was just an inadequate amount of evidence demonstrating the keto diet in those conditions, and also in defining long-term effects of keto. Some of the already identified potential effects of long-term keto included risk of dyslipidemia, which astronauts commonly see in spaceflight. So there is a potential risk for the keto diet to exacerbate blood lipids or increase liver fat deposition, which is another documented effect from spaceflight. So given this and some other concerns, I propose a diet with 35% of energy coming from fat. And this is equated to a balanced diet with a moderate fat portion. Of the fats included, I wanted to have an increased portion from omega-3 fatty acids, which aid in decreasing inflammation, as well as decreasing the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids, as this ratio is associated with the risk of obesity and heart disease. Fasting is also an integral part of the proposed plan in the form of time-restricted feeding. So this method of intermittent fasting is associated with several health benefits, including improved cardiometabolic health, type 2 diabetes improvement, and favorable changes in lipids and inflammation. Evidence demonstrates more positive health effects when an earlier and smaller daytime eating window is used. So for the proposed plan, I initially started with a 10-hour daytime eating window and 14-hour overnight fasting window. And the more conservative plan is again aimed to get the positive effects of time-restricted feeding and ensure crew members have adequate time to consume all of their food. But as this plan becomes more normal and more comfortable, individuals can hopefully decrease the daytime eating window and see more health benefits. In terms of supplements, I did try to include micronutrient-rich foods in the diet plan to decrease the need for supplementation. And I really only tried to include supplements that either had a long and successful history of evidence showing their benefits, or supplements for nutrients that are harder to find in food sources. So this left me with 800 IU of vitamin D per day, which is the dose shown to reliably sustain vitamin D levels in spaceflight. 200 milligrams daily of CoQ10 was chosen to support mitochondrial health, decrease oxidative stress, and it also has potential benefits for glucose metabolism, lipids, and inflammation. The same dose of curcumin was also selected to address in-flight inflammation with potential benefits for muscle health, insulin resistance, and insulin resistance. And I also included omega-3 supplementation because it's harder to get high levels of omega-3 intake in diet without using seafood. And because of the plant-rich protein source goal I had in mind, I just wanted to include an omega-3 supplement to help achieve those higher levels, in addition to including more plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Finally, a daily probiotic was also included to support gut health and address the association between poor gut health and inflammation, as I mentioned earlier. An observed effect of spaceflight is reduced microbiome diversity, which might be connected with other negative health effects. So by including a daily probiotic and increasing dietary fiber consumption, the proposed diet will support establishment and maintenance of healthy and beneficial microbe species. So with my proposed food and nutrition plan, I created numerous recipes and tested the proposed diet for 2 weeks. On my slide, I've included a description of what some of these meals and snacks consisted of. I was pleasantly surprised by just how tasty some of the meals were and also how filling they felt. And this was especially ideal when beginning intermittent fasting, as one of the main challenges is dealing with hunger during those prolonged fasting periods. In addition to the meals being filling and palatable, the diet also demonstrated the ability to improve fasting blood glucose and blood pressure in a test subject, as markers were recorded 1 day before and 1 day after the 2-week diet test period. And this was a relatively short amount of time to hope to see a metabolic improvement, which just gives me further encouragement that more metabolic improvement would be seen with a longer diet duration. And while creating the proposed food and nutrition plan, I also wanted to keep diet sustainability in mind, as this will be crucial on long-term missions where resupply is infrequent and inconvenient. So a few simple objectives that complement the proposed diet plan are, firstly, to expand onboard food production, as current food production aboard the ISS makes minimal contributions to food supply. Secondly, cultivating foods with lower water requirements could help conserve water and maximize food production. A couple examples of crops with lower water requirements are black-eyed peas and snap beans. Finally, altering protein sources to use less animal protein and more plant-based protein sources will decrease the need for resupply. Protein is a crucial dietary component to support crew member muscle mass and prevent loss of lean mass. Also, as I mentioned earlier, plant sources have less sulfur and iron than animal sources, and iron and sulfur levels are associated with acid load, bone loss, and oxidative stress in high amounts. So these are just a few manageable options to improve diet sustainability for a long-term mission. So in conclusion, given the current literature and evidence, a balanced plant-rich diet with time-restricted feeding is best suited to support long-term spaceflight nutrition and improve metabolic health. And I would like to thank the National Space Society, Space Edge Academy, and the Mars Moon Astronautics Academy and Research Science for this incredible contest opportunity, I really appreciated and enjoyed diving into the literature and thinking practically about what type of diet is feasible, but also capable of addressing health and improving metabolic health. So
Thank you very much, Katarina. Very interesting. And in trying to keep tonight's program as efficient as possible, we're going to wait for questions and comments from the audience until after we see both contestants' presentations. So next up is our first place winner, Zsuzsanna Benyo. She is from Hungary, where she has amassed an impressive educational background. She holds a certificate from Wageningen University in the Netherlands, where she studied nutrition against cancer and cardiovascular diseases, metabolic health, malnutrition, and overnutrition. She has also earned an MA degree in economics and political science. She is passionate about space nutrition and innovative food technology and is currently pursuing a Bachelor of Science degree in dietetics at the Semmelweis University of Health Sciences in Hungary, studying cancer prevention and microbiome research. She's a member of the Hungarian Association of Dietitians, and she's been on a ketogenic Mediterranean diet combined with intermittent fasting since January of this year. Zsuzsanna is also quite a linguist. In addition to her native Hungarian, she speaks English, German, French, and a little Russian. But because of the time difference and the fact between here and Hungary, and the fact that Zsuzsanna has young children, I don't believe she's joining us live tonight, but she has provided us with a recording of her presentation. So can we run that presentation now, please?
Stay healthy. That's what I said to my 15-year-old son last December when he came up with the idea
Get full screen
that he
there if
wants
you
to
could.
become an astronaut.
Okay.
A responsible mom of 3 children, I decided to dig into this subject. And this is how I found the contents with the title Food and Nutrition Plan for Deep Space, organized by the National Space Society and Mars Moon Astronautics Association and Research Science. And hereby, I would like to say thank you for everyone who are involved in this initiative, because it's just wonderful that even myself as a mother and a student studying nutrition
Now, I think
can do an awful lot in order to support the future generation, our future astronauts, because it's no more a science fiction, but already a science fact that they will go to Mars and Moon. Ever since, my mission is to establish a deep space nutrition system mitigating disease risks both in space and on Earth. In order to reach my vision, a world of multiplanetary humans with health. How to reach this vision? I created an innovative strategy, a holistic umbrella called Space ABC. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about all these 5 key pillars. The first is ketogenic Mediterranean diet. Second is intermittent fasting. The first is personalized nutrigenomics, including supplementation. The fourth is one of my favorites. It's phytotherapy. And last but not least, we need to make sure that this system, this food system, is sustainable even in deep space. What do I understand under ketogenic Mediterranean diet? It's a 4-to-1 proportion ketogenic diet with low carbohydrate, unlimited calories, olive oil as the major source of added fat. I recommend more than 2 tablespoons of olive oil per day, green vegetables, salads. I use mainly fish, And if we are in deep space, it's realistic to have rather cultured fish, resveratrol, which is coming from the Mediterranean diet, but this time it's not in form of wine, but as a substitute. And this includes unprocessed foods, preferably, and organic. Why ketogenic Mediterranean? It has been scientifically proven that it decreases inflammation. Insulin resistance reduced with this diet. It lowers body fat, blood pressure, blood sugar, and reduces LDL cholesterol. Why a special diet is crucial in deep space? Based on the experience, radiation is a major challenge in space, not to mention deep space. But thanks to this diet, having lots of fruits and vegetables, we can decrease the negative effect of radiation. For example, when we talk about oxidative stress or inflammation. There is a detailed section in my study explaining the scientific background, the rationale, why exactly ketogenic Mediterranean diet is recommended. Hereby, in a nutshell, I would like to highlight the role of gut microbiome as short-chain fatty acids. It has definitely positive effects on our gut microbiome, and short-chain fatty acids maintain metabolic homeostasis. Butyrate, derived from fermentation of dietary fibers, maintain intestinal barrier integrity and protect from intestinal inflammation. Gut microbiome has an impact also on skeletal muscle physiology, which is a major challenge in deep space. Short-chain fatty acids increase nutrient and metabolic resources and limit the re-emission of latent viruses. Last but not least, it has positive benefits also in terms of cancer prevention and cancer treatment. In terms of further research into ketogenic Mediterranean diet, I recommend conducting studies related to its positive benefits in case of cardiovascular diseases and type 2 diabetes. At the same time, I would like to encourage engineers to look into the solution of having a chemical absorption related to removing ketones from the air, because for the time being, it's an issue that life support systems in space might not be able to remove exhaled ketones from the air. The second pillar is intermittent fasting. It has protective role with respect to ionizing radiation. Intermittent fasting was proven to be an effective therapeutic strategy for improving multiple cardiometabolic endpoints like insulin sensitivity, fat accumulation, stroke, or diabetes. Moreover, it improves glycemic control and other metabolic parameters like reducing visceral fat, blood pressure, and markers of oxidative stress. You might be wondering which version of intermittent fasting I am recommending. Calorie-restricted 20-hour intermittent fasting 2 times a week with eating window between 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. is recommended by me. Other days, with 16-hour intermittent fasting eating window of 8 hours from 11 a.m. till 7 p.m. This timeline is ideal for the circadian rhythm, allowing sufficient good quality sleep and concentrated work for at least 8 hours. this enables the astronauts to conduct even research in space. Plus, resistance interval training is recommended to preserve muscle mass and to get into ketosis faster. But why to skip morning breakfast? Our body secretes higher levels of growth hormones, cortisol, glucagon, and adrenaline in the morning hours. The next pillar is personalized nutrigenomics. There is a trend worldwide to use genetics in healthcare. Why not to do this when we talk about nutrition for our astronauts? There is a tool, a technology, how we can set personalized nutrition plan, and even how to realize this thanks to 3D printed technology. Within this point, the question often arises if astronauts need additional supplements. To date, the official statement by NASA is that it's needed only if the nutrient content of the nominal food system doesn't meet the requirements for a given nutrient, or when data show that the efficacy of nutrient supplementation is advantageous. To date, one supplement met the standard of NASA, and this is vitamin D. Having said that, I would like to do further research into pre and probiotics. And this is a list of pre and probiotics that I recommend to be considered for personalized deep space nutrition plan. And on top of that, magnesium, choline, and MCT oil, because of ketogenic diet, is also recommended by me. One of my favorite areas is phytotherapy. It has been long forgotten that phytochemicals have enormous health benefits. It has been tested already on Earth, and it's high time to test this even in space. Artemisia, which is favorite for me, not only because of its name, Artemis mission, but also because it has been proven to have benefits, advantageous benefit to prevent cancer. Or silymarin should be definitely researched further in deep space because it has a protective role in terms of liver functions, or curcumin is also very interesting since it has a proven effect in cancer prevention. The fifth pillar of my strategy is the so-called deep space sustainable food system. Because it's not enough just to put together a nutrition plan, but we also need to make sure that it's realistic to have how the food can be produced in deep space under deep space conditions. As you can see, one of the solutions is 3D food printing or cultured meat, cultured proteins. But hereby, I would like to call your attention also to the question of alternative protein. So how alternative proteins can be produced, grown in deep space? Based on the research so far, mealworms are an ideal solution for this because mealworms can be grown relatively easily and in a sustainable manner, even in space. So why to test this nutrition strategy in analog? I'm very glad to be part of this process and to do this analog research in the desert. because we need to mitigate disease risk and reduce markers of metabolic syndrome, both in space and on Earth. And we need to find a way to balance our gut microbiome composition linked to food intake. We will measure several aspects of health during the analog mission, like effects on metabolism, musculoskeletal and immune systems, neurobehavior disorders. This is an example of a menu that I put together for our analog mission. I hope everyone will find something delicious. Two of my favorites are the Hungarian fish soup, halászlé, and duck greaves. Both are fatty and just ideal for ketogenic diet. As a conclusion, I would like to ask all the dietitians, nutritionists, researchers in space medicine to join our forces and make sure that we have sustainable food solutions, food systems, to make sure that our astronauts, our children, even in deep space, when they will go to Mars and Moon, stay healthy, thanks to these 5 pillars. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Should you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, even after the forum. Please feel free to contact me via email or LinkedIn, and I can only encourage you to take part in next year's contest, Blueprint Your Health Span for Earth and Mars. Thank you.
Okay, well, that was tremendous. Thank you so much. She's not here to see it, but we'll send thanks to her. So now I'd like to introduce a very special person. I've known Dr. Susan Benyo for better than 7 years. She has always had incredible stamina, knowledgeability, and humanity, especially when it comes to the grueling pace of NSS-ISDCs, where I see her most often, but also at Mars Society events. Not content to remain in an undoubtedly lucrative medical practice, she has committed fortune and persistence to the highly unlikely business model of Mars Moon Astronautics Academy and Research Science, the updated name of her company. She is a one-woman Lewis and Clark and native guide rolled into one, sweating or shivering it out in remote and inhospitable locations, along with her equally capable medical staff and student charges. How does she do it? She does it by bringing the highest and most recent technology to bear on the matter of survival in environments that will only be exceeded by inhospitable Moon and Mars, but also by the example of her understanding of human nature to motivate and inspire persistence, adaptability, and completion of mission with all parts sent back home as a better whole person than when they started. Some of her many projects, affiliations, and honoraries are as follows. She's an official space coach affiliated with U.S. Space Force and U.S. Air Force. She received 2 knighthoods as Dame from the Royal Crown of Montenegro and a similar conferral from the Royal House of Georgia. She's a member of the Board of Governors for Life Sciences and Bioengineering branch of the Aerospace Medical Association. Her research focuses on space medicine, astronautics, health, human factors, and exponential technologies. Well, it's too late to start my video. So please welcome Susan Benyo. Susan?
Thank
Don't stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that introduction. That was wonderful. And hello, everyone. First of all, I want to congratulate the 2 winners for this year's competition. And it was really exciting to hear your presentation. I also want to, I can't believe that we're going to be entering the 4th year, working in partnership with the National Space Society on this, in particular with the space health and Medicine division, which is overseen and managed by Bill and his team. And, with MMAARS, my organization, working with you and working with the winners and given the opportunity to be able to have a chance to, one, come in as an analog astronaut in our in-person training missions in the Mojave Desert, and also to be able to have the opportunity to test out their ideas. So I'm really very excited to be here. I would like to spend a few minutes to present a little bit about MMAARS. So am I able to share screen?
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much. So let's see. Let me share my presentation. I'll try to keep it quick and fast. And all right, here, can you see my slides?
We see them.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic, wonderful. Well, as we all know, MMAARS stands for Mars Moon Astronautics Academy and Research Sciences. So we are both not only focusing on astronautics and training in the field of astronautics, which includes the acronym of STEAM or the verticals of STEAM, but we are also an R&D research institute. So in a very short sentence, we are training super space heroes, right? But we're very focused on civilian astronauts, especially with the recent last 3 months of looking at private citizens going up into space on the Blue Origin or SpaceX rockets. This is the new industry, I think, for everyone. Space is for all, for the opportunity to become civilian astronauts. And that's what we've been focusing on since 2016 with MMAARS, but also for us to be able to train the next generation new leaders to enter the new 21st century new space era. So this is really what the vision of MMAARS is about. We're also very much about using space and astronautics to be able to inspire, innovate, and educate the masses, right? And also to be able to incorporate the UN SDGs of DEI, which is diversity, equality, and inclusivity, and to be able to have a real massive social impact, or we call the MTP, massive transformative purpose, to be able to not only support and innovate technologies and capabilities for one day becoming a multiplanetary species, but more importantly, the connection to Earth, right? How do we improve life on Earth with these new discoveries? So that is really kind of the vision and mission of MMAARS. So here, very quickly, this is where we are. This is an actual sunset out here in the Mojave Desert, where we do our training facility. And building the MMAARS space is what we're actually now expanding up in 2022. But we are in the epicenter of commercial space here in Mojave Desert, because we're literally 35 minutes drive from the Mojave Spaceport. So in a very nutshell, this is high level overview. We offer and been working on creating and validating programs in the virtual astronautic training, level 1, 2, and 3. But what's so unique about us is we also allow you the opportunity to come in and train as analog astronauts in our low fidelity here in our training facility in the Mojave Desert. But we are also the first organization to deploy to mid and high fidelity. So we've done training up in Nepal, 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet. And the end of next year, we'll probably be going to Everest Base Camp, to Antarctica, to Arctic. So these are more higher fidelity, more complex experiential simulations that you get to experience, right? And bringing in the research as well. So here is a flyer. This is really what I think is so unique in the opportunity, in the training and the education, is the fact that you can come in as virtually in our virtual training, but even during that virtual training, you have the opportunity to work and to interact with the in-person crews, right? Because we run them concurrently. So here in this flyer, you could see, here you come in through the usual virtual platform, Zoom, and then you're able to join the remote mission support team during that virtual training program, and work with the crews that are rotating here, as you could see here, right? And be able to work with them, interact with them when they're doing EVAs, extravehicular activities, or when they're doing IVAs, intravehicular activities. In this case, you could see them doing and learning about using technology in med tech, in robotics, and learning about, you know, medical procedures, and so on and so forth. And that's what's so unique about MMAARS. And in this slide, you could see we are primarily focused on exponential technologies. In other words, the R&D aspects of MMAARS and the training programs is that when you participate, you actually engage, you're going to learn about cutting edge, novel frontier exponential technologies. So here, just giving you an example below the images, some of the crews are coming in, working on different technologies, and this is part of the in-person training program. But what also you could see today, what we've pioneered is a modular, expandable, portable base camp. Here you could see here, which we've been deploying since 2016. But we are now expanding to building a MMAARS analog, first of its kind, training settlement. So with that, this is the next slide. I want to focus more on also now in the next few slides about the focusing on bringing in food technology, bringing in our missions, how we have brought in food studies, nutrition studies, part of the Astro Wellness program. So in this slide, this is several of our early missions in 2018, 2019. This is very early. We started to incorporate a portable greenhouse. But in the later missions, we expanded the size of the greenhouse. This was a very early prototype. But you could see we brought in studies. For example, here you could see the studies where we were looking at medicinal plants, you know, herbs that has medicinal properties. We were growing them in Martian and lunar regolith. We were, you know, looking at also doing DIY, vertical gardening, you know, and being able to say, how can you incorporate the operational side, but also the research side in growing food, right, in a sustainable fashion, bringing in technology, biotechnology, looking at, for example, bringing in, and remember, this is also, you know, training and introducing new ideas and technologies for the crews that maybe they're engineers that have never really looked at biotech tech tools, right? But also looking at producing food for future Martian or lunar settlers, right? So this is something that's a very integral part of the analog training, the in-person training. Okay, so today we have done we've done over 30 missions, right? Short duration missions. And here you could see images of several of the aspects of food is the 3 Ps, the physical aspects of food and nutrition and diet. How does it affect physically the crews? And I'm going to say it does, right? It also the psychological aspects of food and then the physiological connection. So the 3 Ps with regards to food, how you cook the food, how you grow the food, what type of food. For example, here on the right, these are images from when we went to 15,000 feet. What was really interesting, and this is something for us to think about, right? What was really interesting was that the plants or the food that we brought in that was grown at sea level would not cook at 15,000 feet. Would you believe that? Most people, I never knew that, right? So we had to default to the Nepalese diet when we were running our missions. So that's one thing, that's something that for us to think about, we don't normally do. So actually one of the studies that we're going to be starting is looking at indigenous plants around the world and then bringing them into our studies, right, as one study, into our missions and growing them in regolith, right? So that is something, you know, for example, you know, how does it cook? Can you grow it? You know, and last but not least, is when the mix of the crew is, first of all, do they have allergies to the food? That was really important. And we had multiple crews that had allergies to certain food that, for example, one person had a full-blown anaphylactic shock when there was cabbage around, even dehydrated cabbage. So you have to really think about those factors when you're looking at, growing food, when you're looking at, cooking the food, when you're looking at allergies, when you're looking at also, the appetite of the crew when they're in the simulation. The operation is pretty stressful. So the stress factor that that the crew endures actually affects their appetite, affects the way they want to eat when they want to eat. So for example, I could see we had talked about ketogenic diets. We talked about fasting. Well, we actually tested a ketogenic diet in 2018, and we had the crew, half the crew coming in, and these were all medical doctors, by the way. So they really were well versed on ketogenic diets. So they were already on a ketogenic diet a few months before they came into the mission. But I'm going to say that during that mission, we had to abort it because it really interfered with how they were able to engage in the mission. So there are all these issues that we have to really look at, and that's really why we conduct these analog simulation missions. So in our MMAARS, we have started a diet nutrition project since 2016 and collected data. This is just giving you an overview, high-level overview of this project, right? Looking at crew members, they keep a diary, a journal. We take daily biometrics. We look at full clinical history and so on and so forth. So this is something we've been doing for many years. And we haven't actually published the work yet, but we will do. But these were at low fidelity in the desert. It's going to be very different when you're doing mid and high fidelity, and when we actually conduct long-term, analog missions, or we take it onto ISS or low Earth orbit. It's going to be very different data sets that we will be able to collect. So one of the, I think this is going to be so interesting that we're going to be starting is the Martian Diet Project. And in this Martian Diet Project, we will be looking at biotech, capabilities, the tools, for example, using stem cells, right? And bioreactors, 3D printing bioreactors, and being able to use that to be able to grow the food and also to incorporate it into the diet. And this is an exciting project that we will be starting. And last but not least, this is where we're expanding our analog sort of training facility. We're under development right now. And this is one of these huge geodesic dome will become our Gaia dome, which is, we don't want to call it greenhouse. We're going to call it a Gaia dome, where we do all of research with that pertains and relates to food sustainability, looking at agri-tech, bringing in robotics to be able to grow the food on a long-term basis in these long-term analog missions. So the goal is for MMAARS is to have up to 1 year to 3 years where our analog astronauts will live as a community, right? And there will be up to 100, maybe to 1,000 eventually of our analog living for 1 to 3 years. That's when you really can test the model of this, whether we can actually grow food, where we can develop the technologies to be able to sustain human, to not only survive, but thrive in long duration in space and on a planetary surface. So with that, this is who we are, MMAARS, and we're very happy to continue this collaboration with NSS and with the space health and medicine sector, and with this competition continuing to its 4th year. So thank you so much for listening. And I think we're open to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Susan. Bert, do we have some questions here? And afterwards, I'd like to say a thanks to all of our participants. I have a few words to say after we're done with Q&A for anyone who's.
Well, we're really over time. If our group wants to stay on, I'm glad to ask some of the questions. Everyone okay with that? We're almost 25 minutes past our time. Everyone's good.
We still have 53 participants. How about that?
Yep. Okay, so let me ask a few, let's see, I'm gonna try to go between some that were submitted beforehand and a couple that came in. So one from James. What about the psychology of introducing a new diet? And that question, it goes to any of the speakers. Anyone want to try that one?
Yeah, can I answer that?
Sure.
Okay, so that's really what I think is a huge challenge. You can talk about bringing all these new diets, right? We had just talked about, and I've mentioned in a real setting with real people, and that's why these analog missions are important. You know, we couldn't run the ketogenic diet for long term. It impacted the psychology of the crew and the individuals. It also, you know, when you're introducing diets that the crew are not familiar with, they're reluctant to go on the diet for long term. I mean, we even brought in, for example, a freeze-dried or dehydrated diet, you know, for the crew, and they couldn't stay on it because it just, for example, you know, they lost the appetite. They didn't like to eat it. It was boring after a period of time. So these are factors, human factors and psychological factors that you need to really understand, right? In a real setting, it's great to be able to say, yes, ketogenic diet, the fasting. I'm going to tell you, fasting at this point, after 10 years of running these analog missions, it's not going to happen because they are already very stressed, you know, physically, psychologically in these analog missions, already stressed out. So you're going to say, yes, we're going to put you on a fasting diet. We're going to put you on this diet. And so these are things for us to consider, you know, more deeply before we start suggesting new diets.
Very good. Anyone else want to take that, or we'll go into the next question?
I would just disagree. One of the impressive things about the astronaut's presentation was, and her book, was her several days of no food in a sort of a stress simulation, as if she'd been captured. And fasting has been a part of every religion through history, maybe a little less since the 30s or so. It is something that usually, if it becomes an expectation or a bit of the training, it's very feasible for people to fast, even fairly long fasts. Almost every guru I know has fasted a good 7-10 days. Again, it is a metabolic reset, and it really does reverse many of the damages that have been described from many sources and, you know, to many targets, mitochondria and everything else. So I would disagree. I think with a little planning on easing into it, as both contestants indicated, start sometime and then increase the time. You get hungry, but the fact is you remain functional. As Jason Fung argued, evolutionarily, when were you most focused? And it was when you're hungry. You're out there looking for something in food. So evolutionarily, we are adapted to be functional, even in the fasting state. So I'll disagree with Susan on that.
Well, Jerry, I wasn't saying.
Susan, we lost you for there.
Clarify, I wasn't saying, I'm just, I just want to clarify with Jerry what Jerry's saying. I'm not saying fasting is not a possibility. I'm just saying that you got to think more. And yes, absolutely, you bring that into the strategy, into the schedule. You plan it well beforehand, and you allow the crew to understand how the fasting is going to be implemented in the mission. That is not to say we cannot do fasting at all. Just want to clarify that.
And I would add.
Go ahead.
I would just add to that, Katarina was already fasting. Katarina, do you feel like you could carry that into an actual analog mission, given the stresses of that?
The initial fasting time I had planned was like a 10-hour eating window, and it was pretty easy transition. It was just like stop eating after 6 p.m. and start eating at 8 a.m., which is like a pretty normal time for people to start having breakfast. So I think for most people, that probably would be a pretty easy transition to like a 10-hour time restricted feeding at first. And it was pretty easy to just go from like not doing time restricted feeding to just a 10-hour window. That was pretty easy. There wasn't too many like hunger side effects, and also having a diet that's like adequate with protein to make sure you're feeling full when you do eat to carry over into those periods of fasting.
So it sounds, Susan, like you've got your first analog fasting astronaut all ready to go.
Wonderful.
There we
I'm
go.
looking forward to it.
Let me get a few more questions. Let me get one that came in from the people who had, when they registered. Let's see. Do you see genetics, emotions, and hormones being a factor in an individual diet plan? Interesting question. Anyone?
Maybe Afshin has an idea about that. Are you still with us, Afshin?
Yeah, sorry, I was turning on the camera on mute.
I know it takes a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely people are predisposed. I mean, we haven't looked at that specifically, but in the clinic, people are predisposed for, higher metabolism, right? Higher mitochondrial functions as opposed to other folks who might have lower metabolics. And then of course, you're as you grow up, your environment plays into having your bioenergetics be either more improved or less improved, as you grow older. So that could definitely play in the factor of how well your nutrition comes into play. Granted, the astronauts are the top 1% of the healthiest people in the world, so their bioenergetics and nutrition, I bet they could pretty much handle the fasting better than the rest of us can, based on their bioenergetics are probably already, as we know, they're already at a higher level than the rest of us are, based on their activity, their physical, the physical capabilities that they have.
Good.
Okay, great. Bert,
Yes.
what's that? Got any more questions?
Yeah, I got a few more. Let's take a few more since we're already over. We could go over a little bit longer. This one comes from Rich. Can meat be specifically cultured with properties that minimize the negative effects generated by certain natural meats such as beef and pork? Interesting.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Well, you have to accept the assumption that natural meat and pork is bad, which I don't particularly accept. So that would be my brief answer to it. I also am impressed by Beyond Meat and other technologies, which can take essentially microbes or mealworms or whatever else and make them taste and look an awful lot like a hot dog or a hamburger or a lot of other things. And they're not quite ready for prime time, but we're starting to see them even in McDonald's.
About that.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bert. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let me take one more question, and then I do have a question for Katarina and Zsuzsanna, because I see Zsuzsanna did make it on.
Really?
Yes. Great to have you here, Zsuzsanna. And so, let's see, this last question, and this kind of goes with the, in a way, it's a kind of connection to that genetics one, but let's see, in the proposed nutrition plans, what socio-cultural and economic considerations are there? Is that a factor? Oh, Katarina, it looks like you want to try that one.
I'll try it a little bit. So for cultural, I'm not really sure. I did try to include a variety of food types, and I think that within each culture there are varieties of vegetables and meats that could be incorporated to make a keto diet or a more balanced diet work. But for socioeconomic, I'm a grad student, so I don't have a very high salary. So when I went to try the proposed diet, I went to the local grocery store and I was crunching all the numbers to see how much each of the meals would cost. And it was pretty inexpensive, honestly. So I think the proposed diet plan wasn't too expensive. The most expensive portion was the supplements, which if you try to minimize your use of that by increasing micronutrient rich foods, I think that helps address that price concern. But overall, it wasn't too bad to create a diet that's able for anyone from any socioeconomic status.
Sounds great. Thank you. So let's close out then, everybody. We're quite a bit over. So let me close with a question to Katarina and to Zsuzsanna. I mean, it was very interesting presentations. Again, as an engineer, it's not something I think about a lot in terms of everything that goes into what would be required for long duration spaceflight. I'm thinking of the technology itself, but you two have done an amazing job and presented some interesting ideas. What's next for each of you? Is this something you might want to consider as a career? Or was this something, this was a great opportunity, but maybe you'll be doing something else? So Katarina, I'll start with you.
Sure. I've always been interested in space, and then like coming to college and seeing Scott Smith lecture and like realizing this is like a whole field, I was so excited. So I would definitely want to keep this going and keep this like job field open. It's very unique and it's a very like unique application of nutrition. But then again, by addressing like space health concerns, you can also in theory address health concerns of the general public on Earth. So I think that's a really, really valuable asset. So I'm not sure what my career plans are yet, but I would definitely keep it open to something space related.
Fabulous. Great, great. Zsuzsanna, how about you?
Unmute.
It looks like we can't hear you, Zsuzsanna. Nope, we're having trouble hearing you.
Your microphone, Zsuzsanna?
Doesn't look like Zsuzsanna's on mute. Nope.
Is it better?
There we go.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
without the earphone. Okay. So I am planning to continue my research related to space nutrition. I love this field, so I'm very much looking forward to join you on the analog mission. And for the time being, I'm doing a study in our lab in the university related to mealworms with a focus on protein. And I am going to mix this also with phytotherapy.
Very good. Well, we want to thank you both for first, congratulations on a job well done. And then thank you for taking the time out to present. Zsuzsanna, I know it's pretty early for you. And thank Bill. We had a little bit of a technical glitch with my presenting your video, but I'm glad we were able to get it going. But again, thank you so much. Wishing you great success in the future as you pursue your careers in space. So I also want to thank, we'll give you a good hand. Yep. So I want to thank Susan for a very interesting presentation on MMAARS as well. I learned quite a bit from that, and it was very informative. I would like to thank my NSS colleagues, Loretta Hall, Lynn Zielinski, and Alif Martin, and Gabriella Lindberg for all you do to help support NSS and for the efforts to make sure tonight's presentation was a success. And my two other NSS colleagues as well, Jerry Mclaughlin and Bill Gardner. A lot of effort went into putting this together tonight. So I know it's probably the longest space forum we've ever had.
Bert, can we make it 2 minutes longer? I'd like to say some special things.
Sure, I could give you, we might as well take it all the way to 11 o'clock Eastern time. Why not? But let me just thank Fred Becker as well for all Fred does. And a thank you to Afshin for your fabulous presentation and for Robert's introduction. Learning a lot more information about this very important topic. So, and I don't think my other colleague, Larry Ahern, is on, but I want to thank Larry for all his efforts we jointly work to develop these presentations. So thank you, Larry. So Bill, I'll let you close it out.
Okay, well, before we run into midnight all the time, I'd like to thank you, Bert, for your capable management tonight. And I just want to say how I admire and respect each and every one of you. In a turbulent time when the sensible thing to do is to dig into the status quo and conform to the familiar, each of you is an outstanding citizen, professional, prepared for live fire from any who may feel threatened in their gut from what we are proposing and doing. I watched a documentary recently, The Unsung Heroes of Apollo. The successful and safe moon landing in July '69 was made complete by the backroom engineers and scientists who told Neil and Buzz it was safe to land despite several alarms as their LEM approached the surface. One of those engineers told of his experience going out for a bite to eat after the momentous event. As he sat down at a cafe counter, he engaged in a conversation with a stranger nearby. The man said, "I landed on the beach at Normandy on June 6, 1944, but I've never been more proud to be an American than today." To our contest winners, one day soon, each of you will rate such a recognition, not just for being a citizen of any one country, but a citizen of the world, for a world eager for good news about how to care for one's health, simply for both here and in space and in surfaces to come. As unlikely as it sounds, we saw you present some such ideas involving food, nutrition, and timing of eating. But the proposals and plans we watched tonight are based on the most sound science research possible. You showed how and why tonight. You're the backroom scientists, engineers, medical professionals, educators, promoters, and producers of today and tomorrow who give a new hope to a world eager for good news and a new lease on life in an undiscovered country beyond the beautiful cradle and mortal coil of our home planet Earth. Thanks.
Very well
Godspeed
said,
and good
Bill.
fortune.
Thank you so much. On that note, everybody, I think what we'll do is we'll say good night. I just want to wish everyone actually a great evening, and for those in a different time zone, a good day ahead of you, and have a great weekend. Definitely stay safe. We will be letting you know about the next Space Forums, which at least at this point is tentatively scheduled for December 2nd. So look for an invitation in your email. So again, thanks to everybody who participated this evening. It was really great. It didn't seem like it took that long, but it's it went pretty fast actually. So thank you so much, everybody. We'll wish you all a good night.